Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of ClueCon Weekly. Joining us this week is Dave Horan, Director of Engineering at Butler Till. Thank you for joining us today, Dave.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Luca. Thanks. I've been a longtime viewer and looking forward to helping to contribute to the podcast.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Maybe we could start with a quick introduction about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I've been in IT for many years, in both operations, software development, and managing engineering teams. And right now, I'm working at Butler Till, setting up a whole new practice here in the product and technology area.
Nice. And well, I mean, the when Chelsea let me know that the topic would be restructuring engineering teams and organizing, I think it's not a topic we go over often enough. We tend to cater to startups or small projects and whatever, but at some point you run into your own, you start tripping on your own feet, right? It's when you grow. And so what's the process you're going through right now, and what are some insights?
Well, it's funny, I've done this a few times with different teams and different organizations, and each one has its own flavor when you come into it. As you mentioned, you kind of get into situations when you're growing, and you find yourself trying to kind of rally the troops or get everybody either hired or take the existing teams and getting them focused on a different set of topics, and that's always a challenge. And as when I think one of the first things you want to do when you're, at least from what I've found useful, is first trying to identify two things. One is where you want to go, what the outcome that you're trying to get from the teams, and then from a team's perspective, identifying where the strengths are for each individual on the team. Teams aren't the teams that are successful really are not just a group of individual people. They are a cohesive group that complement one another, and that's one of the things that I try to do when I'm either realigning teams, or if you have a whole group of people that are already in existing teams, sometimes you rearrange those teams based on people's strengths and technologies that they know, and you try to build that so that they complement one another. So if you have those individual team units put together and each of them knows what they're shooting for, that certainly is a good start in aligning those teams towards a common goal. So that's where I start.
Yeah, that's a good. So maybe there's a first question that probably will start the entire process. Like, how do you realize that you need restructuring your engineering teams? And here's where I'm coming from. I've been part of many startups as a consultant, as a developer, as a director, as a lot of different things. And they all tend to grow up in a bit of unstructured manner for a while. Like, you start with the CTO, then you got the first person in is usually a front end engineer. That's the one that builds the actual dashboard for customers. Then you start growing out, and then you end up having 10 people, and nobody's even sure what to report to. Right? It's okay. I just pick tickets from GitHub and do them. I don't know. So how do
Right.
you realize there's a process that needs to happen? Like, what are the symptoms?
Well, I think there's a whole bunch of symptoms. I mean, and they don't materialize all at once. That's the challenging part. You have to kind of watch for them, and it's never the same thing twice. So you have to kind of watch across the board for a lot of different things. I think when people start stepping on each other's toes code wise, you get too many people in the same code base at the same time for different things. Um, you get requirements that start becoming mixed and unclear. Uh, if you even have the luxury of having a product team, sometimes you don't. In startups, you're just doing it. You get somebody says, "Hey, we got to build this thing," and you're in there building it. And I think there's a number of things when you get to a certain critical mass of people. Everyone's looking around saying, "Okay, tell me what to work on." And when you find that happening and no one has really stepped up, sometimes you'll have people that will just naturally step up and kind of organize the team, and those tend to be your kind of natural either scrum master leaders, technical leaders, however that you want to call them. But I think some of those symptoms tend to be the more confusion, the velocity of the teams goes down, or you don't even really you've grown from a handful. You say it was a startup, you've got a handful of people in one team. You start growing to a point where you've got so many people in one team that they really have a hard time coordinating the work. And you can see that in some of the meetings, they'll spend more time coordinating the work than actually doing the work. And that's when you start saying, okay, maybe there's something up here. We gotta either split the team up into two. You've got to add a scrum master, a product person to organize that, the requirements. Um, there's a number of smaller symptoms that pop up, and like I said, they don't appear overnight. It's not like they just, oh, you get handed a list. Oh, here's a problem. There's a chart you can see. Um, it's a slow evolution of things, and at some point, everyone looks at each other and going, "Okay, this isn't working. We got to find a better way." And that's when you got to start realigning things a little bit.
Mm.
I don't know if you're
Effectively,
experienced the same. You've may probably have experienced the exact same thing. So
yeah, it sort of emerges. Like at some point, I think you nailed it right on the head. Like at some point, you're in the usual daily meeting, stand up, however you want to call it, and someone says, "Well, you know what? I don't know what's going on anymore. We need something different." Which is,
yeah,
it is, it just happens. Like
yeah,
reality tells you. I want to say
yeah, yeah,
it
absolutely.
is.
Yeah, and I think that's where that's when you start saying, okay, do we need to have like a scrum master or somebody to organize the tickets or prioritize things? Many times in startups or even as you're growing any kind of teams internally, if you have a number of teams that exist today and you're trying to kick off some new initiatives, that sort of thing, after a while, it just becomes chaotic where people need to have priorities. You can't do everything all at once. And the answer is to hire more people, which nobody's usually a fan of from a finance standpoint. You'll get a lot of pushback on that. And then you'll say, oh, well, how do we better utilize the people we have? And that's where we set the priorities and everybody can dig in at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree that finance is never happy. It's hard. It's really hard to convince them that you need to hire people, but that's
Yep.
so
Yeah,
maybe
and
that's
you and also you may not need the people. That's the other thing too. If you organize yourself differently and realign the teams, you may not need the extra people. They may
that's a
be
good point.
you're fine. It's just that the work itself isn't organized well enough or prioritized properly to get you to the outcome you're looking for in a reasonable timeline. So, um, you know,
I think
there's
I
no end to the
definitely
work.
agree. Yeah, it is. I think I definitely agree that you're right. Hiring might in fact be some kind of a knee-jerk reaction. I mean, it's the go-to for many managers. I need more people, but instead, what do you suggest doing then? That's a perfect segue into. So what do I do? Okay,
Right.
we
Well,
had that meeting, the one we mentioned before, where everybody was saying isn't working.
right, right. Well, I think that's when you really start saying, okay, what are the goals here? What are we trying to accomplish? You kind of revisit a lot of times the vision gets lost in the busyness of the day to day. So you need to kind of reestablish, okay, what are we shooting for? What's the end goal that we're trying to develop? What are the customer outcomes that we're trying to deliver with the software we're creating? And once you start peeling that layers of the onion away, you start getting to the core of, okay, here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to really deliver. And then you can start prioritizing all the different features, all the different tech debt, all the backlog items that there's always, tech debt, infrastructure things, cleanup work, new technologies that emerge that you want to integrate. So I think at that point you start prioritizing things and saying which one of these items is going to get us closer to the goal, which effort. So you instead of just you kind of take it up a notch from the ticket level, the tactical kind of I'm going to everybody takes a ticket and goes to more of a okay, what work streams do we want to look at that are going to get us to the end result that we want, and then how are we going to measure that because that's always a challenge too. How do you measure? People want to focus on productivity and things like that, and that's a whole nother issue with, metrics and developers. But I think a lot of it comes down to giving the team something to shoot for, breaking it down into some specific areas that they can work within, and then prioritizing the work. And then once they have that, then there's a clear list of things to work on. So as other distractions come in and hit the team, they've still got this priority list they can work from. Because you're always going to have these. other things hit your backlog or even the current sprint if you're doing support work and things like that. So, but from a realignment standpoint, I think that articulating the vision, what you're trying to do, is a first step.
Okay, that's a point. So yeah, I have a first-hand experience with that. We did a similar process over the last few months internally, and it did really start with CEO, the CTO, leadership sitting down and effectively rewriting down what the company was about. It was a great it was truly a great opportunity for everybody to understand what the direction would be. And you're right, has to start from there, because it's very often the problem is, I don't want to say this in a bad way, but sometimes engineering doesn't understand what they're doing. Ticket
Or why they're
says
doing it. Yeah, why they're doing it. Yeah, exactly.
ticket just says again, the ticket talks about I don't know, some UI feature. Great. Why is that UI feature in the list though? The UI feature is in the list because it's used by it needs to be used by call signer agents that are a new type of customer we didn't have before, and now we have. It is extremely relevant to have the conversation. So here's something, very often we go into this. Do you advocate doing full scale agile, especially when reorganizing teams, or do you go for some let's call it more subtle and focused approach?
That's an excellent question because I think everyone, I've been hiring a lot of new developers, to my team, either new in their career or just new to our company. And they all come at it with different levels of experience with Agile. And Agile is I think every place I've been, and I don't know about you, but every place I've been, it seems to be slightly different. It means something different
Yeah.
to each group, right? So there's no one size fits all solution that's going to like be the silver bullet. Um, I think people come in and see these presentations of what Agile's about, and they think, "Oh, this will solve all my problems," And I am like, if unless it's done right, and tailored to what your needs are, I that's going to cause problems and slowdowns. So I really advocate for pick the parts of Agile that are going to fit your organization, fit the timelines you have to work within, fit within the communications styles that your teams have. Now, that's not to say that toss a lot of that stuff out and just do your own thing. I think there's a lot of discipline that the process brings. But if going overboard with it, you have so many ceremonies, so many meetings, so much going on that it detracts from what the developers are really trying to do, which is coding, actually getting the coding. And you really want to have the time to allow the developers to collaborate on the code. So they're not all working in silos. And oftentimes you have so many meetings, if you kind of stick to strict agile, that it starts becoming, meeting overload for everybody because now they've got
Yeah.
collaboration meetings, they've got ceremonies, they have to, all this stuff. So my approach really is to take it slow and say, let's use the best parts of Agile that fit your team. And again, that's an art more than a science. Um, use kind of pull out what's going to be effective for you. So I have done the full agile stuff. It's great when it works. You have to have some real discipline, and the business folks have to agree to it as well. Um, and I've also done it fast and loose with nothing but a backlog and Kanban board. So use a Trello or something like that as a very simple tool. And there's somewhere in the middle of that is where you end up being. And I think there's going to be uh, every team's got to decide amongst themselves based on the work that they're doing, what's going to work for them. But there are some minimum things that I think are effective, and that is having someone other than the developers work with the business stakeholders to develop a backlog and then
Mm.
prioritize that backlog. Because
Okay.
again, you
Yeah.
mentioned this a minute ago, the engineers may not always know what's going on or what they're doing. They're focused on the work, getting the code done. Having that big picture helps, having a product owner or somebody work on that backlog. They can help work with the team, be that bridge between what the business needs and what the developers can do, and they'll prioritize stuff. And the engineers can then bring up issues, or if they say, whoa, this thing looks really big, let us take this particular item, go off and work on an architecture solution and come back with options for you. Because uh, oftentimes you'll have product or somebody come to you and say, I want this thing made, some button or whatever. And, but you're like, well, okay, but that doesn't make sense. What are the business requirements behind that? And if you have those, then as an engineering group, you can go back and collaborate and say, okay, how are we going to solve this thing? Let's give them some options. Because coming back with just a no is never popular. So you say, okay, well, what you wanted, great. You want this button? Very cool. It's going to take a year to do. And here's why. But here is the other, I joke about the McDonald's menu a lot. My big team's already sick of me saying this, but you've got the large, medium, and small, and you provide different options for solutions with the pros and cons of each one and a timeline for those. And so you may say, hey, I've got this one in the middle that it won't take us a year, but maybe it takes us a month to do, a couple sprints to do this. But there are some drawbacks to it, but it gets us closer to the goal you're shooting for. And they go, yeah, I want that. Well, then we take that ticket or that epic and break it down, that problem, and then we can work it through. But it's those are the important conversations to have up front. It's not always about the ceremony and checking all the boxes and stuff. Um, so I think for me, that's the difference between the strict agile and the what works for your team kind of things. I try to allow for that when it's like I said, it's an art than a science. You kind of have to, you look at charts, you could look at all that stuff, but you kind of got to get a feel for how the team's working and the type of work that they're doing. I mean, telecom that you guys do is much different than what other people do. So everyone's going to have their own pace and the way they work together, and you have to adapt to that.
Yeah, I totally agree that sometimes it's everybody does it differently. I feel like my favorite thing to have in sort of bringing agile into a team is the simplest process possible: backlog and sizing. Where sizing is, I don't like having more than 3 or 4 granularities. Like I like the t-shirt thing, and
Yep.
even if you're doing t-shirts, I don't like having the XL stories. Like it's small,
Yeah.
medium, and large. XL stories are it's called a
They're too
smell.
big. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Right. Right.
it's okay to have an Excel story on a backlog, but it should never make it to a should never make it to an actual work session. Like if you should never make it to an actual sprint. Before
Right.
you do the sprint, to break up the Excel into arbitrary pieces. Otherwise, it never works out correctly.
Right.
It's definitely something to address. Yeah, the and well, speaking of which, we were talking about restructuring. I have like 10 people, 12 people, 20 people, which is the usual size when you start running into issues. What do you think is the best team size and the structure? Like having a director, more flat, more middle management. I hope the answer is no middle management, but that may be some of it is needed. What do you think is the right size and organization for the teams?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That comes up a lot. Because a lot of it, again, depends on the type of work you're doing and how much collaboration or interaction the teams have. I tend to try to stick to, maybe 3 developers, 1 QA, 3 to 4 developers per team. I don't want to go more than, if you get to 5 or 6, then it starts getting a little big. And you've also got to balance that out with QA as well. If you have dedicated QA resources, there's a ratio there. So you have to keep an eye on. And if you have too many developers, they're generating too much work for QA to actually keep up with. And you'll see that, as you watch your sprint board, things will get hung up. If you have a QA state in your board, you'll see things getting backed up there and stuff. So I tend to try to keep the teams relatively small and focused. Um, and if they're all working under the umbrella of a larger piece, again, you try a software application or whatever, you try to break it up into, like you said, with the Excel stories, same kind of thing. You break up the work into sections and they can collaborate, but they go off and do they have their own backlogs and their own sprints. With the idea of, this is where people say, well, what does the scrum master do? What does a technical project manager do? Why do I need them? They seem like overhead. Well, they're the people that can help tie those teams together and make sure they're all on the same page. And that's really important because they can call out things to a manager or a director to say, hey, I think we need some better clarification on A, B, or C because I got two teams working on the same thing, but we didn't. And I mean, I don't know how we got here, but let's go back and talk about that. It happens. So I think that's where, again, having product people involved, that's the value they bring, is they can be that bridge to engineering. So the engineering size for those teams, I try to keep them relatively small, but you've also got supporting players like QA, DevOps, all these types of other roles that kind of support. They tend to float. You got architects, things like that. They can float across the teams. They're essential, I think, to keeping the flow of things in your team working well. You don't want a team sitting around because they're waiting for some AWS thing to get set up. They don't know how to do. So have your DevOps guy on standby to do that setup for them and monitor that stuff. So I think again, the 3 to 4, you get to 5 and it starts. Sometimes it
Mm.
works well, but it depends. And then QA, that varies. It really depends on the type of work you're doing, I think.
Yeah, and the product
Yeah,
sizing QA is never one size fits all because
absolutely.
there are products where the time needed to test and telephony in our case, for example, is one of them. Does take a longer time just because phone calls take,
Right,
even if you're automating them, have to take place. Maybe a test takes 2 minutes, which is a long time in testing line. It's
right, right.
because you have to
Yeah,
actually place the call, waiting for it to go through, and it's not just making a web request, which you can whittle down to milliseconds. You need to do some work. I think you also nailed something, and I have to say that I used to come from the other side. Like I come from 15 years of purely technical consulting. So we build solutions where we were coming in working for other people. So they will
right.
be our product people. Working in a startup environment, I really realized the value having good product backing you, because frankly, that's the difference. That's what keeps engineering knowing what they're doing, keeps engineering on track, keeps engineering even happy. I want to say, like they understand what they truly understand what the goal is, and you're not getting into each on stabbing on each other's shoes is very very important. So it is. Unfortunately, good product people, we're very lucky, but finding good product people is not easy. So that's
True, true, absolutely. Yeah, it's an art. I mean, again, people go to school for those things, but again, practice and your natural talents and aptitudes. There's certain people that just nail it, and you're like, wow, that's really effective. I love that. So
I don't want to say developers are easier to find because that's not maybe not fully true in the general sense. But you can, if you look long enough, you can usually find someone who's going to be able to churn out some code that you need to move forward, right? It's
yeah,
let's
yeah,
let's put it that way. Maybe they're not going to be the best long-term solution for the team. Maybe the company itself is looking for someone slightly different, but you'll find someone that can make that UI that you need to actually ship the product, or
yeah,
the backend service that makes the payments for the product. You're going to be able to find someone. Well, the product part is really really hard, and they are difficult to find. So hold on to your to your product people because they're harder to find than
absolutely,
developers.
absolutely. Yeah, I've
They
and I've experienced the same kind of things. And what I, especially like in front end developers, I try to, again, as I mentioned before, with that matching up, that complementary skill sets, and uh, everybody has strengths and weaknesses. And when I'm building a team, it's not just a group of individuals; it's a intentional grouping of people that complement one another. And when you're talking about, say, a front end designer or things, yeah, you can find somebody if there's you need something done quick, you can find somebody to do that. Long term, if you do have the luxury of UI UX people on your team's designers, so to speak, having a front end developer that gels well with that side of things, because when you're trying to do prototypes of stuff, uh, uh, startups, everybody wants a prototype tomorrow, and so you've got to have that continuity of going from design to development to releasing it.
preferably tomorrow morning.
Right, exactly. So having those systems in place and the people having the relationships and the teams, those are again, UX being other kind of supporting role in some of these products and teams that you're working with, having them all work cohesively, it's not easy. It's takes a lot of effort to make sure you're, as a leader, adjusting, the levers to make sure everybody's working optimally. And to your point about the structure, I like keeping the team small, um, and focused. And if if there's going to be a lot of teams, there's only so many direct reports a person can have. So there, at some point, you're going to have some sort of management level, and I try to keep those as flat as possible, but still have enough people to provide for the human side of the developers, not just the keeping them on track with the work they're doing, but building the skills they need, all that sort of thing. Um, as they move forward, because again, you're trying to hopefully build a long-term team that you can kind of grow over time to tackle larger and more complex projects.
Yeah, the growing is you cannot. First of all, I think it has to be said. People probably know, but you cannot literally cannot grow without having a, solid back end to start. Like it's just not possible.
Right.
It's it just doesn't work. It's so you will have to get there at some point. It really depends whether you want to do it the right way or you want to learn by by slamming your face against things. But the reality is that there
Right. Honestly, I was talking to somebody recently about that. It's like you can learn from, the only reason I learned what I've done is because I've made all the mistakes. So but the best way to learn those things is learn from somebody who's already done it. So you don't have to make those same mistakes. So that's where finding, reading articles, talking to people, watching podcasts like this in different areas, finding what works for different teams. That way, you can find different ideas you can try out because there's no one size fits all solutions for some things. The constant learning, just like development, you're constantly learning.
many yeah you gotta it's a trial and error in most cases, but there are also things that work. So if I have to say one thing again, it's do a backlog and go from there, literally just
Yeah.
that. If you can
Yep.
start from there, you're already doing more than many other teams are doing,
Y-
which sounds silly, but that's true.
It is true. I mean, it's so true. Absolutely. Start with the backlog and prioritize that backlog, and then you can start moving things into sprints and getting good estimates out of the developers, making sure everybody understands how to do estimating. Again, that's something that takes practice on the part of developers. So that affects how long things take or how the plans are laid out in expectation setting for customers. So yeah,
And it's
it's a lot
not
of
wasted time. A lot
no.
of times you end up talking to people that say we don't have time for that. You maybe think you don't, but you will have to. Because there's
Right,
no.
right. You pay now or you pay later, and if you pay now, it's going to be less. So an hour now you spent discussing the work and estimating it and going through those architecture discussions and all that stuff will save you so much time and pain later on, because it'll just be you can't you'll be trying to tweak things as the train is already going down the track, and it just doesn't work very well from a performance standpoint.
Not at all. Yeah, well, I think it's a great discussion, and we could go on for a while. But whilst we're approaching the end, I would like to ask you:
Sure.
Are you going to any events, speaking, or even participating or speaking to any events in the near future? If there's something you're looking for, as I like to hear about conferences that are happening, so we can maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of people at Butler's Hill presenting at all kinds of conferences. So you can go to
Mhm.
butlershill.com, and you can check out where we're going to be at that point. I'm still My schedule is still up in the air a little bit, so I'm not planning on speaking anywhere yet. But we have many people. People this week even are speaking. We
Oh,
regularly
good.
attend various marketing conferences. We're a marketing company, so yeah, check the website, and there's lots of details on there.
Nice. Yeah. I feel like conferences are my favorite way to learn. So you go there because you get to ask questions other than when you're done speaking and people come to you and ask. It's my favorite thing actually.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's fun. It's fun.
definitely. So yeah, and of course, if people have questions, you can ask them under the video with comments and whatnot. We're super happy to relay them to Dave. And for now, well, Dave, thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you.
Sure, it was great. I loved doing this. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
So we had Dave Horan, but director of engineering at Butler Till, joining us today. We went through a few things about organizing a team, how to apply agile, how to get started organizing, and I feel like that's going to be very useful for a lot of people. So thanks again, Dave,
Great. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
and for everybody else, I see you next week. Goodbye.